friends! Are you ready for some fun? Get ready to sing, and learn, and play with BloomBloom! What do you call a lazy kangaroo? A pouch potato. What do you call a fish with no eyes? FSH. What do you call an angry carrot? A steamed veggie. Get ready to sing, and learn, and play with BloomBloom!
Suddenly, a sly fox with a bushy tail trotted by. Seeing Squeaky's massive pile of nuts, his eyes gleamed. HMMs, so many nuts in one place. This will be an easy meal, he said with a wicked grin. Before Squeaky could chatter a warning, the fox snatched up the entire pile in one swift movement and dashed away.
Ho, ho, ho!
Squeaky was stunned. He watched as the fox disappeared into the bushes, his precious nuts lost forever. Tears welled up in Squeaky's eyes. He scampered down his tree, his heart heavy with despair. I should have listened to Professor Hoot, he sighed, flopping onto a nearby leaf. Just then, a small voice squeaked, "Are you all right?"
Ho, ho, ho!
Squeaky looked up to see a tiny field mouse with a worried expression. "I saw what happened," the field mouse squeaked. "That was no way for you to lose all your hard-earned nuts." Squeaky sniffled, unable to speak at first. Then he whispered, "What do you mean? How did you know it was me?" The field mouse tilted his head. "Because you left tracks," he said.
Ho, ho, ho!
"Every time you take a step, you leave behind footprints that tell a story. I followed your footprints from your tree to this spot. And before that, I saw your bushy tail and heard your excited chattering." "Oh," Squeaky said, feeling embarrassed. "I guess I was so focused on gathering all those nuts that I didn't realize how obvious I was being. I just wanted to have enough nuts for the winter.
Ho, ho, ho!
Now I have nothing." The field mouse nodded understandingly. "I know how important it is to be prepared for winter. Last year, a harsh snowstorm caught me by surprise, and I had to huddle with several other mice in a hole just to stay warm. It wasn't fun." Squeaky felt a surge of determination. "You're right," he said. "I can't just give up now. Winter is coming, and I need food." He looked around.
Ho, ho, ho!
"Do you know where I could find some acorns or walnuts?" The field mouse pointed his nose toward an oak tree laden with ripe acorns. "There are plenty there, but they're high up. You're good at leaping from branch to branch. You should have no trouble gathering some." "Right," Squeaky beamed. "Thanks for your help, little mouse. I won't forget it."
Ho, ho, ho!
With renewed energy, Squeaky scurried up the oak tree and began plucking ripe acorns from the branches. One by one, he tucked the acorns into his cheek pouches until they were bulging. Then he scampered back to his cozy dray in the tree hollow to store his bounty. Over the next few days, Squeaky repeated his routine, gathering more acorns and storing them in his dray.
Ho, ho, ho!
Slowly but surely, he built up a new stash of nuts. Throughout it all, Squeaky kept an eye out for foxes, always staying one step ahead. He leaped from tree to tree with ease, his bushy tail bouncing with each jump. The other squirrels watched him with a mix of admiration and amusement.
Ho, ho, ho!
They couldn't help but wonder why Squeaky took such big risks when there was safety in numbers. But Squeaky was determined to do things his own way. One crisp afternoon, as Squeaky was scampering through the trees, he spotted a flash of red fur. A fox was slinking through the underbrush below him. Squeaky froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The fox looked up, and their eyes met.
Ho, ho, ho!
Well, well, the fox said with a sly grin. "If it isn't little Squeaky. And what do you have there?" "Plenty of nuts, I see." Squeaky forced himself to stay calm. He had a plan. Taking a deep breath, he pretended to be unafraid. "Yes," he said nonchalantly. "And what if I did?" The fox's grin widened. "Well, Then I would simply take them from you, of course.
Ho, ho, ho!
The fox crept closer, his eyes fixed on Squeaky's nut stash. Squeaky held his ground, his tail twitching nervously. When the fox was within striking distance, Squeaky made his move. He leaped from the branch and landed on the fox's head. The fox let out a yelp as Squeaky dug his sharp claws into the fox's soft ears.
Ho, ho, ho!
Get away from me, Squeaky screeched. The fox shook his head violently, trying to dislodge Squeaky, but the little squirrel held on tight. Squeaky clung to the fox's ears for dear life. Suddenly, the fox dashed into a nearby cave. Squeaky, still hanging on, found himself tumbling through the darkness. "Ho!" he exclaimed as he landed on a pile of leaves.
Ho, ho, ho!
Disoriented, Squeaky looked around to find himself in a strange part of the forest. The cave opening was just a dark hole in the side of the hill now, and the sound of the pursuing fox was nowhere to be heard. Still clutching some nuts in his mouth, Squeaky climbed out of the cave and stood on top of the hill. From his vantage point, he could see the entire forest around him.
Ho, ho, ho!
And in the distance, he spotted a familiar sight, his tree with its knothole dray. Relief washed over him. He had escaped the fox and he still had some nuts left. As Squeaky made his way back home, he realized that his adventure had taught him an important lesson. Sometimes being different wasn't just okay, it was smart.
Ho, ho, ho!
He might not be able to hide his bushy tail or stop a persistent fox, but he could use what made him unique to outsmart his enemies. From that day on, Squeaky continued to gather nuts in his own special way, leaping from tree to tree and keeping a sharp eye out for danger. And whenever he saw a wise old owl or a tiny field mouse, he gave them a friendly nod.
Ho, ho, ho!
After all, it was thanks to their help that he had learned the true meaning of being a squirrel.
Ho, ho, ho!
Once upon a time, in a forest filled with ancient trees, lived a little squirrel named Squeaky. Squeaky loved nothing more than gathering nuts for the winter. And this year, he was determined to collect the biggest and best nuts the forest had ever seen. One crisp autumn day, Squeaky scampered up his favorite oak tree, the tallest, strongest oak in the whole forest. As he chattered excitedly to his friend, Professor Pinnacone, about his grand plan.
Ho, ho, ho!
"I'm going to gather so many nuts, Professor, that my pile will reach all the way to the top of your pointy hat and beyond." Professor Pinecone chuckled, his bushy eyebrows wiggling. "Oh, Squeaky, you and your big plans. Don't you know that winter will be here before you can say acorn? You'd better hurry if you want to gather enough nuts to last you through the cold months." Squeaky puffed out his cheeks and said, "Don't worry, Professor, I've got plenty of time.
Ho, ho, ho!
And besides, I'm going to do it my way." Professor Pinecone shook his head and sighed. "Well, if you insist on wasting time, don't come crying to me when your tummy is rumbling and the snow is falling." With that, he turned and shuffled away, muttering about young squirrels with no sense of urgency. But Squeaky was too excited. "Nonsense, Professor. This is much faster." So, Squeaky spent days and days gathering nuts. He found the biggest, shiniest acorns, the plumpest walnuts, and the crunchiest pecans.
Ho, ho, ho!
He gathered chestnuts with caps like velvet, and hickory nuts that sounded like maracas when he shook them. He even collected some rare hazelnuts, which were a real treat. He gathered and gathered until his cheek pouches bulged like balloons, and his paws ached from carrying such heavy loads. Finally, when he could carry no more, he started piling his treasures up right outside his tree hole. It was a magnificent mountain of nuts, gleaming in the autumn sun.
Ho, ho, ho!
Squeaky felt very proud. "Look at my wonderful pile," he chirped to anyone who passed by. A family of deer stopped to admire it. "So many nuts," they exclaimed. "You must have worked so hard, little squirrel." Then a wise old owl hooted, "A fine collection, young Squeaky, but you should bury them and hide them away before someone else finds them." Squeaky waved his bushy tail dismissively. "Oh, I'm not worried," he said. "My nuts are safe here. No one will find them."
Ho, ho, ho!
And he spent so much time gathering and admiring his pile that he put off burying them. "I'll do it tomorrow," he promised himself, "or maybe the day after. The pile is too pretty to hide yet." Days turned into weeks and Squeaky's pile remained proudly on display. But soon, winter began to brew on the horizon. The leaves turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson and began to flutter down from their branches. The air grew crisp and cool, and the days shorter and colder.
Ho, ho, ho!
One blustery night, a huge windstorm swept through the forest. Branches swayed wildly, leaves danced like mad sprites, and rain poured down in sheets. Thunder grumbled, and lightning flashed, shaking the very foundations of the forest. Squeaky huddled in his tree hole, feeling safe and warm, dreaming of his giant nut pile. When morning came, the storm had passed. Squeaky poked his nose out, eager to see his treasure. But when he looked where his magnificent mountain of nuts had been, his whiskers drooped.
Ho, ho, ho!
The ground was bare. The strong winds and heavy rain had scattered his entire pile of nuts far and wide. Some were washed into the stream, some were buried under fallen leaves, and others were simply gone, carried away by the storm. Squeaky cried a little squeaky cry. All his hard work, all his precious nuts, gone. He had been so proud of his collection, so sure of his cleverness, and now it was all lost. Scampering down the tree, he set off to search for his scattered stash.
Ho, ho, ho!
He looked under leaves, behind logs, even in the shallows of the stream, but most of his nuts were gone. Only a few soggy acorns remained, hardly enough to keep him alive through the winter. Squeaky felt a lump forming in his throat as he realized the gravity of his mistake. He hadn't listened to Professor Pinecone's advice, and now he had almost no food for the winter. Winter was coming, and Squeaky had almost no food. The days were getting shorter and colder, and every day that passed without food was a day closer to danger.
Ho, ho, ho!
As the forest grew quieter, and the trees stood bare against the gray sky, Squeaky knew he had to act fast. But where could he find food now? Despondent and hungry, Squeaky stumbled through the forest, his stomach rumbling with hunger. Suddenly, he spotted something. A flicker of movement behind a bush caught his eye. Squeaky cautiously approached and peeked around the trunk. There, nestled in a bed of fallen leaves, was a small burrow with a wisp of smoke curling invitingly from a hole nearby.
Ho, ho, ho!
Squeaky hesitated. He didn't know who lived there. It could be a badger or a fox, a weasel or a skunk. But the thought of a nice warm den and a full belly spurred him forward. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the burrow entrance with his paw. A moment passed. Then a gruff voice called out, "Who's there?" "It's just me, Squeaky," he replied. I'm sorry to bother you, but I was hoping you might have some food I could borrow. I've been searching for nuts, but I haven't found any, and I'm so hungry."
Ho, ho, ho!
Please, could you help me?" Silence. Then the voice said, "Come in." Relieved and grateful, Squeaky scurried into the den. Inside, it was cozy and warm. A fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. And sitting near the fire was the kindest face Squeaky had ever seen. It belonged to an old hedgehog who introduced himself as Harold. "I heard you talking about food," Harold said kindly. "Come sit by the fire and tell me about it."
Ho, ho, ho!
So Squeaky told him his tale of woe, how he had gathered a huge pile of nuts, how he had been too proud to bury them, and how the wind and rain had taken them all away. Harold listened patiently, nodding his head. When Squeaky finished, he said, "Well, I guess you're going to need some help gathering food. Come back with me to my garden. We'll get you something to eat." Harold led Squeaky out of the den and into a lush, sprawling garden filled with vegetables, berries, and grains.
Ho, ho, ho!
They gathered ripe blackberries, juicy tomatoes, and handfuls of seeds and nuts that Harold had stored for the winter. Squeaky's heart soared with gratitude. Harold even gave him some of his own stash of nuts, ones that Harold had carefully collected and hidden away from greedy paws and sharp beaks. Then Harold did something that made Squeaky's eyes widen in surprise. He took Squeaky to a hollow log near his burrow and showed him a pile of nuts and seeds.
Ho, ho, ho!
"Here," he said, "this is for you. Take as much as you need, and if you need more, just ask." Squeaky's paws trembled as he reached out to touch the nuts. It was the most generous offer he had ever received, and he couldn't believe his luck. Over the next few weeks, Squeaky worked hard helping Harold in his garden, gathering food and preparing for the winter. He learned how to plant seeds and care for growing things, how to preserve food and store it safely, and most importantly, the value of hard work and kindness.
Ho, ho, ho!
And whenever Harold noticed Squeaky's sharp eyes searching the ground, he would smile knowingly and say, "Need some help, Squeaky?" And Squeaky, with a grateful nod, would reply, "Yes, please." As winter approached, Squeaky's worries faded away, replaced by a newfound sense of hope and friendship. He no longer feared the cold months ahead because he knew he wasn't alone. He had Harold and his friendship to rely on, as well as the skills and knowledge he had gained to help him survive.
Ho, ho, ho!
And though he might never forget the hard way he had learned his lesson, Squeaky knew that sometimes it takes getting lost to find your way. And sometimes it takes a little help from a friend to get back on track.
Ho, ho, ho!
Deep within an ancient oak tree lived a wise old owl. Professor Hoot, as the squirrels affectionately called him, had seen countless seasons come and go during his lifetime. And throughout those seasons, he had watched the squirrels behave in predictable ways. They would spend their days frolicking and playing until the afternoon sun began its slow descent. Then suddenly, they would enter a frantic state, quickly gathering as many acorns as they could.
Ho, ho, ho!
Every year, this behavior puzzled him. Why didn't they gather food gradually throughout the warmer months when they had plenty of time? Instead, they waited until the last minute, rushing around in a panic. He often shared his observations with the squirrels, advising them to start preparing earlier. But his advice always fell on deaf ears. The squirrels, in their infinite wisdom or lack thereof, never listened.
Ho, ho, ho!
As the first hints of autumn touched the landscape, a plump, carefree squirrel named Squeaky began his daily routine. Each morning he would meet up with his fellow squirrels for a day of frolicking. They chased each other up and down the oak tree, delighting in the simple joy of being alive. After a good long play session, Squeaky would start thinking about finding some food. Now, he wasn't lazy, but he wasn't exactly diligent either.
Ho, ho, ho!
He had a favorite tree where he knew there was a nice little stash of acorns from last year. But instead of getting them now, he had decided to wait a bit longer. After all, there were plenty of acorns left, and he figured he had plenty of time before winter. So he'd spend his days playing and searching for food, gathering enough to get by, but never really thinking about the future. One particularly crisp autumn day, Squeaky was scampering around his favorite tree collecting acorns when he heard a loud crack.
Ho, ho, ho!
Looking up, he saw Professor Hoot staring at him with an air of disapproval. "Squeaky," the owl began in his deep, resonant voice, "why are you still gathering nuts? Don't you know that winter is coming?" Squeaky froze, his cheeks bulging with acorns. He had been so focused on collecting his daily stash that he had even noticed the change of seasons. "But there's still plenty of time," he protested, stuffing another acorn in his mouth.
Ho, ho, ho!
"I can't eat these now, but I'll be sure to get them when the weather turns colder." Professor Hoot shook his head slowly. "You never learn, do you? Winter will be here before you know it, and you'll be left with nothing." With that said, the owl spread his wings and glided away, leaving Squeaky to ponder his words. Squeaky tried to shake off the unsettling feeling in his stomach, but the image of himself shivering and hungry in the cold wouldn't leave his mind.
Ho, ho, ho!
For the rest of the day, he continued gathering acorns, burying them in various spots around the tree. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows on the ground, Squeaky finally realized the gravity of the situation. He had procrastinated for so long that he had almost used up all of autumn. Determined to make up for lost time, Squeaky began to work frantically, gathering nuts from every tree he could find. He scurried around, stuffing his cheeks and burying his stash as fast as he could.
Ho, ho, ho!
But no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The thought of winter and the prospect of hunger loomed over him like a dark cloud. One evening, as Squeaky was racing through the trees, he heard a sudden crash. Looking back, he saw a large branch from his favorite tree fall to the ground, revealing a gaping hole in the tree's canopy. The tree, unable to support itself without the branch, swayed dangerously. Squeaky knew that if it fell, it would crush his hidden nuts.
Ho, ho, ho!
Panic surged through him. He rushed to the spot where he had buried some of his stash and began frantically digging. Just as he managed to unearth the nuts, a strong gust of wind rattled the leaves. The skies were gray and stormy, and the temperature had plummeted. Rain lashed down, threatening to wash away his precious hoard. Squeaky, drenched and despairing, looked up at the stormy sky. In a moment of weakness, he cried out, "Oh, Professor Hoot, why didn't I listen to you? Now I've lost everything."
Ho, ho, ho!
The rain intensified, and Squeaky, shivering with cold and fear, ran to find shelter in the hollow of an old tree. Curled up in a tight ball, he waited for the storm to pass, feeling utterly defeated. When the storm finally subsided, Squeaky emerged from his hiding spot to a world transformed. The wind had carried away all of his nuts, leaving him with nothing. Disheartened, Squeaky trudged over to Professor Hoot's tree. Peeking inside the hollow, he saw the wise old owl fast asleep.
Ho, ho, ho!
Gathering his courage, Squeaky climbed in and said softly, "Oh, Professor, my nuts are all gone. The storm just swept them away." Professor Hoot's eyes, sharp despite their age, opened slowly. He stared at Squeaky for a moment, then nodded his head sagely. "Squeaky, I did warn you. Storing all your nuts in one spot, and not burying them right away, was a significant risk." A profound realization dawned on Squeaky that day. He had been foolish and careless, and now he had to face the consequences.
Ho, ho, ho!
But amidst his despair, he knew he had to find a solution. Winter was coming, and he needed food to survive. With renewed determination, Squeaky spent the rest of autumn working harder than he ever had before. He searched for any scraps of food he could find, gathering berries, seeds, and whatever else he could get his paws on. He spent his days running around the forest floor, stuffing his cheeks, and hiding his bounty in secret locations only he knew about.
Ho, ho, ho!
It was a much more time-consuming process, but the sense of security it offered was invaluable. Every time he found a nut or berry, he took extra care to stash it in a different, secret spot. He dug holes, buried his treasures, and covered them with leaves and twigs. He even started taking notes, remembering the exact locations of his hiding places. Throughout this time, Squeaky never forgot the feeling of desperation he had experienced during the storm.
Ho, ho, ho!
He remembered the gnawing hunger and the bone-chilling cold, and he vowed to never let himself get into that state again. Winter arrived, and the forest was transformed into a wonderland of snow and ice. The days were short and cold, and the nights were long and dark. Squeaky huddled in his cozy den, snuggled up with his secret stash of nuts and berries. He was grateful for his foresight, for when the worst of winter hit, he was able to stay warm and fed.
Ho, ho, ho!
He might have been one of the only squirrels prepared for the harsh weather. Slowly, the days began to lengthen. The sun shone brighter, and the snow melted into glistening streams. Spring was on its way, and with it, the promise of new life and a bountiful harvest. As the first buds appeared on the trees, Squeaky knew it was time to emerge from his winter slumber. He stretched, yawned, and padded out of his den, feeling stronger and wiser than ever before.
Ho, ho, ho!
The forest was alive with the sound of birdsong and the buzz of insects. Flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, and the trees were covered in lush green leaves. Squeaky took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on his fur. He knew that winter was over, and it was time to start planning for the next one. But this time, he was ready. He was no longer the careless, carefree squirrel who had almost lost everything. He was a survivor, and he was going to use his experience to ensure his future.
Ho, ho, ho!
And so, as the other squirrels began their frantic dash to gather nuts, Squeaky worked steadily, methodically, gathering his stash for the winter ahead. He might have been just one squirrel, but he was prepared. He had learned his lesson well, and that, in itself, was a victory worth celebrating.
Ho, ho, ho!